Today I want to look at one of the most dominant NHL players of the past 20 years, Evgeni Malkin. Gino has won 3 Stanley Cups, 2 Art Ross trophies, the Hart Trophy, the Ted Lindsay Award, the Calder Trophy, and the Conn Smythe, but being second fiddle to Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh his whole career has led to a lot of people forgetting and not acknowledging how much of a beast Malkin has been. In hockey, an athlete's prime is typically defined as a 5 or 6 year window through their mid-20s where the player is at their athletic peak, has been in the league long enough to adapt and learn the playstyle, and typically their point totals match this peak performance period. However, conventional wisdom doesn't seem to apply to Evgeni Malkin. He burst onto the scene and despite the injuries has had amazing point totals through his career. I set out to initially make this video on the prime of Evgeni Malkin's career, but looking through every stat line and season, I've decided that we'll go through each one independently, as his trajectory doesn't exactly fit the traditional prime definition or view. Before we talk about the living legend that is Gino, take a second to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. I truly appreciate all the support on these videos the last month and a half, and clicking subscribe is the best way to help us continue creating this type of content. Let's start this deep dive off by saying that it's an absolute crime that the NHL did not include Evgeni Malkin in the top 100 NHL players of all time list in 2017. As a diehard hockey fan, I fully understand and appreciate how many great players there have been in league history and that we owe everything to those who made the game what it is today. But Evgeni Malkin is extremely deserving of being on that list, and I've hardly seen anybody disagree with that take. Point share is a very popular stat these days, which basically calculates how a player contributes to their team's points in the standings. In short, point share estimates how many goals for and against amount to standings points, and then award those points to players on each team based on how many goals are scored for and against the team divided by the player's ice time relative to others on the team. It's a lot like the wins above replacement or WAR stat in baseball, in the sense that it tells a story, but it doesn't paint the full picture, aka it can't be the singular source of truth on a player, but gives us a good idea. Hockey Reference has their own proprietary point share system, which currently has Evgeni Malkin at 45th all-time at 146.83 career point share. For comparison, Alex Ovechkin is 8th all-time at 198.45, while Sidney Crosby sits at 12th at 183.58 due to playing less career games. Malkin being 45th on this list puts him just below the likes of Ron Francis at 42nd, Brendan Shanahan at 43rd, and Mark Recchi at 44th. It also places him ahead of guys like Mike Modano at 48th, Matt Sundin at 49th, and even Patrick Kane at 61st. However, if you like more traditional stats like I do, Malkin currently sits 40th in all-time points at 1,251, 54th in all-time goals at 481, and even more importantly, he's tied with Ray Bourque for 14th all-time in playoff points at 180. Now, he's battled quite a few injuries over his career, which we'll touch on later, so points per game is also a good measuring stick, where he's firmly in the top 25 all-time at 1.150 points per game. So now that you know how I feel about Malkin over his career, let's look season by season at his trajectory and his greatness. He debuted for the Pittsburgh Penguins in October 2006 after being the second overall pick in the 2004 entry draft behind only his fellow countryman Alex Ovechkin. Malkin quickly made his presence felt in the NHL, setting a modern NHL record by scoring in his first 6 straight NHL games. The only other time this had been done in history was by Joe Malone in the NHL's inaugural season. And for good measure, his first career goal, in his first game of course, came against the legendary Martin Brodeur. Gino finished his impressive rookie campaign with 33 goals, 52 assists, and 85 total points in 78 games. He took home the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year, beating out the likes of Paul Stastny, Anze Kopitar, Phil Kessel, and Joe Pavelski. The Pens made the playoffs this season, but were eliminated in 5 games by the Ottawa Senators, while Malkin recorded 4 assists. His sophomore year was more of the same. Lots of points. Malkin finished second in the entire league in scoring with 47 goals, 59 assists for 106 points, and second in the Hart Trophy, again behind his buddy Ovi. Sid was injured for a good chunk of the year, so the Pens relied heavily on Gino, playing him more than 2 minutes per game more than in his rookie year. The Penguins had a magical run through the playoffs, losing only 2 games prior to the Cup finals against Detroit, but ultimately they lost to the Wings in 6 games in the finals. Malkin finished with 22 points in 20 games these playoffs. Expectations were sky high in Pittsburgh the year after, and Malkin, now in his 3rd season, did not disappoint. He led the league in points with 113, tallying 35 goals and a whopping 78 assists. He outpaced his buddy Ovechkin, who finished with 56 goals, 54 assists for 110 points, but Ovi, yet again, finished first while Malkin finished second, losing another Hart Trophy to his buddy Ovechkin. Revisionist history a little bit, but I think Malkin absolutely deserved it this year. Gino still made out okay in the hardware department though, as he took home his first Stanley Cup alongside the Conn Smythe Trophy after racking up an absolutely dominant 36 points in 24 playoff games, as Pittsburgh got revenge on Detroit in the finals. He was an absolute force all playoffs long, one of the more dominant performances of my lifetime, and I still think about it to this day. This run made Evgeni Malkin the first player to lead both the regular season and the playoffs in points in the same year since fellow Penguin Mario Lemieux did it in 1992. All told, this was the season that really put Gino on the map, and like I said, one of the more dominant playoff runs we have ever seen in hockey. The following season, 2009-2010, was a little bit quieter for Malkin as he played 67 games and recorded 77 points. The Pens again made the playoffs, but lost in the second round to the Montreal Canadiens. He finished with 11 points in 13 playoff games this time around. 2010-2011 was even tougher for Gino as injuries limited his games played. He had already missed a few games before getting re-injured midway through the season and needed knee surgery in February. He missed the remainder of the regular season plus the playoffs, finishing with just 43 games played and 37 total points. The naysayers were out now asking if the injuries could hamper not only Malkin's career but also Sid's. Crosby only played 22 games in the next season, 2011-2012, due to his struggles with post-concussion syndrome, but Malkin sure stepped up in his absence. He missed 7 games from the knee injury in the year prior, but in his 75 games that he played, he managed to score 50 goals for the first time, along with 56 assists to lead the league with 106 points and finally take home the well-deserved Hart Trophy as league MVP. He was absolutely dominant start to finish this year and somehow took more shots than Alex Ovechkin to lead the league in shots as well. Unfortunately though, without Sid, the Pens just couldn't go deep into the playoffs. Gino recorded 8 valiant points, but the Pens lost in 6 games to the Flyers. Now, to interject in his career path, you could argue this was the end of Malkin's prime. He had played 6 NHL seasons, had won almost every award you can, and after this point, didn't return to MVP polls until 2017-2018 when he finished 7th. But if you ask me, this was really only due to injury troubles. If you focus on the points per game and the results, he was still an all-world player from this point onward, so we're going to keep pushing forward. 2012-2013 was the NHL lockout, so Malkin returned to Russia to play. He was second in KHL scoring when the NHL picked back up in January, and crazily, despite only playing half the year there, still finished third in year-end KHL scoring. Once back in North America, he got bit by the injury bug again, as a concussion and shoulder injuries held him to just 31 of the Penguins' 48 games, recording 33 points on the year. He did return to full form for the playoffs though, as he always seems to, recording 11 points in their 6-game first round, 5 points in their 5-game second round, but unfortunately did not record a single point as the Bruins swept the Penguins in round 3. Impressive numbers all around, 16 points in 15 playoff games, but none in round 3 killed the Penguins. They needed Gino badly. In 2013-14, he only played 60 games due to multiple lower body injuries, but still amassed 23 goals, 49 assists for 72 points. Gino was a little streaky in the playoffs this year, as were the Penguins overall, ultimately losing in the second round, but Gino tallied 14 points in the 13 games. In 2014-2015, he had yet another point per game showing, recording 70 points in 69 games, but ultimately the Pens were put out by the Rangers for the second straight year as Gino went scoreless in the 5-game playoff series. The following 2 years, as we know, the Penguins went on to win back-to-back Stanley Cups. Malkin played just 57 games in 2015-16, but totaled 58 points, followed by 18 in 23 playoff games on the Pens run. In 2016-17, he ticked slightly up to 62 games played and recorded 72 points. He also went on to lead the playoffs in points, notching 28 in 25 games, where he very well could have won his second Conn Smythe, but ultimately, Sid took it home for the second straight year with his 27 points in 24 playoff games. Either way, the Pens added 2 cups over this 2-year stretch, so I don't think Gino cares about that second Conn Smythe. Sid can have it. Now, deep playoff runs will often leave teams banged up and exhausted in the subsequent years. Add Malkin's injury history and the COVID-shortened years, and he really hasn't played a ton of hockey since these two cups. He was truly dominant in 2017-2018, tallying 98 points in 78 games, and as teased earlier, he finished 7th in the Hart voting, getting him back in contention for the first time in over 6 seasons. He added 8 points in 9 playoff games that year, but somehow was a wild -7 in their playoffs. In 2018-19, he finished again with 72 points in 68 games this time, but was a career worst -25 on the year. The Pens were bounced from the postseason in just 4 games, where Malkin recorded 3 points. 2019-2020, he had a crazy 74 points in just 55 games, finishing 10th in league MVP voting, but again, the Pens were burnt in 4 playoff games as Gino notched just 1 point. 2020-2021, he only played 33 games, recording 28 points, but added 5 points in their 4 playoff games. The next year, 21-22, Malkin played 41 games, totaling 42 points, and added 6 points in 7 playoff games as the Pens lost in round 1 yet again. Last year, 2022-23, he played 82 games for the first time since 2008-2009 and recorded an impressive 83 points. But sadly, the Penguins' historic playoff run came to a halt as they missed the Stanley Cup playoffs after 16 consecutive years of making it. Finally, that brings us up to date, where Malkin currently has 22 points through 26 games with the 23-24 Penguins under new general manager Kyle Dubas. So let's get back to the bigger discussion on Malkin. Injuries have hampered his career totals, as have all the shortened seasons between lockouts and COVID. Yet every single time that Malkin has played over 50 games in a season, he's been a point per game player or better. Only 2 of his 17 completed seasons have finished lower than a point per game pace, and those were 2 seasons in which he only played 43 and 33 games respectively. We do of course have to acknowledge that Malkin's defensive acumen isn't always at an elite level, and that frankly he looks a little out to lunch at times in his own end, but there is simply no question that Evgeni Malkin is one of the best players of a generation, and most certainly belongs in the NHL top 100 list. His 2 Art Ross seasons were some of the best hockey that I have ever seen, and despite those being back in 2008-9 and 2011-2012, his 3rd best season, points per game wise, was actually way more recent in 2019-2020. Living in the shadow of the Crosby vs Ovechkin rivalry, always being second string on the Penguins behind Sid, and always being stuck behind Ovi when it came to national play and awards, certainly play a part in why Malkin is as overlooked as he is at times. But in conclusion, Evgeni Malkin is without a doubt one of the best NHL players of the last generation, and he very easily cracks the top 50 players of all time in my opinion. And guess what? The stats back it up. Like we talked about, his 2009 Conn Smythe run was literally some of the most fascinating and dominant hockey that I have ever seen. He was a bull in a china shop for 24 games straight and willed the Penguins to a Stanley Cup. So while his prime might not be as easily identifiable as it is for some players, let's make sure we all give Evgeni Malkin credit when we talk about superstars and all-time players. But in the meantime, hit that subscribe button and we'll see you again next week.